Greetings, Earthlings. We, the aliens, have arrived. We will use you as a fertilizer for our indoor alien plants. You all will die. Good afternoon, this is Henry Keane and our weekly wrap-up, yet another try to explain some very hard things in easy terms, which this time will be next to impossible since the line about aliens seems to be less absurd if compared with what is going on in the United Nations Security Council today. Imagine someone comes to your place, rapes your wife, abducts your children, ruins your house, shoots you, and when all of a sudden you survive and begin to seek for support of the local Security Council, you, same all of a sudden, find out that a criminal who has committed the crimes, a criminal whose name has become synonymous with heinous crimes against you and all mankind, presides over the very Security Council that was created for the purpose of preventing such crimes. Oh, I beg of you, ladies and gentlemen, of high officials of UN Security Council, sitting in your lovely soft chairs, do not tell me that you are cramped with laws, rules, regulatory paperwork that does not give you the opportunity to act in any accordance with objective reality at all, instead forcing you to follow completely inviolable protocols, which not only is ridiculous and absurd, but also downright dangerous.
Russian UN Security Council presidency on April 1st is a bad joke. Russia has usurped its seat. Its waging a colonial war. Its leader is a war criminal wanted by the ICC for kidnapping children. The world can't be a safe place with Russia and United Nations Security Council.
The potential damage of nuclear gavel-wielding Putin is hard to overstate. Even beyond its symbolic value, the presidency of the UN Security Council carries very real institutional power within UN, chairing all discussions, applying the rules, controlling the docket, schedule and credentialing for all debates and managing all draft resolutions, just by the way. And Russia has proven adept in this fast abusing the vast procedural power of the Security Council presidency. I mean, just imagine the process where petitions and resolutions to stop Russian criminal aggression against Ukraine will now be submitted to Russia. I've always suspected that the more global the structure of a system is, the less flexible it is in a rapidly changing ambience. However, in this case, Russia's criminal war in Ukraine has been going on for a year now. Our soldiers of international legions, civilians, have been dying at the hands of Vladimir Putin, an international criminal at large, the chairman of the United Nations Security Council. I'm sorry, dear world. I don't know how to explain this hard thing in simple terms because there are no simple terms to explain this hard thing. I really don't know what to say. Let's give burglars banks to run. Let's give convicted sex offenders a charge of daycare centers. Let's allow any outdated autocratic dictator to make a mockery of international diplomacy by becoming the face of global peace as he escalates his unjust invasion of Ukraine with new attacks daily. Time Mag puts it perfectly fine. In fact, the last time Russia held the rotating Security Council presidency was not coincidentally February 2022. Back then, Russia sought to exploit the Security Council to confuse and mislead the world of its real intentions, and Russia's devious machinations were aimed at impeding international support for Ukraine, both leading up to and immediately following the start of the invasion on February 24th. Also, time lays out a three-step process to block Putin from taking over the Security Council by invoking the UN's own charter and to bring Russia's standing into better alignment with its actual capability. Firstly, now that Russia has been designated an aggressor state by the UN, leading international law scholars have noted that this technically disqualifies Russia from presiding over any UN body, much less the UN Security Council. The UN should thus invoke its charter and prohibit Russia from assuming the presidency of the Security Council. Secondly, Russia should be removed from the Security Council and General Assembly given its unlawful presence. If Russia is interested, it may apply for a non-voting observatory status in the General Assembly as a provisional step. Thirdly, Russia should then have to formally apply for membership, to be discussed and voted upon both in General Assembly and in Security Council, like every other new member of the UN. Ultimately, The president of the UN Security Council is supposed to safeguard global peace and harmony, is he not? Putin, by all means, cannot be allowed to claim this mantle as long as he continues his invasion of Ukraine. And the member states of UN, in particular the US, the United Kingdom and France, 3 of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, should have been ready to stand up to the convening of the Security Council under the illegitimate leadership of warlord Putin, but it never happened. And here we go. UN Security Council is presided by an international criminal at large, Vladimir Putin. If you ever ask yourself why any mean extraterrestrial civilization has not yet came and kill us all, this is why. They look at UN Security Council and think these guys will extinct on their own, no reason to intervene. Bucha. This leafy suburb of the Kiev became synonymous with Russian brutality after a military retreat last March revealed ravaged streets littered with civilian bodies. Russia's occupation of the town lasted 33 days, resulting in more than 1,400 deaths, including 37 children. International investigators are still collecting evidence in Bucha and in other places where Russian troops committed widespread atrocities in the invasion that began on February 24, 2022. During this week, President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, took part in many events on the occasion of the anniversary of the liberation in liberated cities and villages. Bucha and Mashun in Kiev regions, Trostinets in Sumy region. Zelensky emphasized that these dates are not only about the events that have become pages of the heroic history of communities, but above all, about the character of Ukrainians who will win this war.
Ukrainian character is a character of people who do not accept aggression, who do not give up what's theirs. This is the character of freedom, which is felt from the birth, and is not forgotten until the last breath, until the end of life. This is the character of courage that allows you to kill even the enemy that the whole world was afraid of. The Ukrainian character was fully manifested when Russia started a total war against all of us, against the state of Ukraine, against our people, against our freedom.
At the very same time, as the Ukraine commemorates 1 year of driving Russians out of our lands, the Kremlin-allied president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, raised the stakes in the 13-month war when he said that Russian strategic nuclear weapons might be deployed in his country along with part of Moscow's tactical nuclear arsenal.
Under the circumstances, I strongly intensified negotiations with Russian President Putin on the return of nuclear weapons to Belarus. It is precisely on the return of nuclear weapons, which were withdrawn in the 1990s, under guarantees. No sanctions against those who withdrawn, no pressure, no planning of offensives and revolutions. Everything is crushed, everything is broken. Do I have the right to raise the question of returning nuclear weapons, the obligation to withdraw which was then before me, signed by madman? Alexander Lukashenko, self-proclaimed president of Belarus.
Moscow said earlier this week it planned to place in neighboring Belarus tactical nuclear weapons that are comparatively short range and low yield. Strategic nuclear weapons, such as missile-borne warheads, would bring a greater threat. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't swing a nuclear club if you can win the war you have started on your own without it. Putin cannot win, so he manipulates the idea that he can then destroy the whole world. Like he told us already that Russia doesn't need the world without Russia. You see, this is what Putin is fighting for the whole world to think that he is Russia. He is the voice of the nation, the oracle, the Neo from the Matrix, the lawmaker and the law enforcer, and Putin is right. Whatever he says or does is translated as Russia said it or Russia did it. Putin has turned Russian nation into population and now can rule with populism instead of truth. Or maybe they always been like that. Maybe this is exactly what allowed us to drive Russians out of our northern lands. They were not fighting for themselves. and for their homes and families, but for their Tsar's ambitions only. Maybe enormous Putin's ego is our greatest weapon against him in this war and will be the reason of Putin's Russia demise. Because Putinism is an infection, a virus that has triggered the mutation of truth into populism. Putin's ideology is a cancer tumor. It grows, it eats Russia alive, it spreads metastases, obviously destroying the morale of its own army, and that only adds more glory to Ukraine. There are people that think about things, and there are people who make things, and there are people who make unthinkable things, great things, like saving lives as an everyday routine. Meet Christopher Stokes. Christopher Stokes is currently working as the emergency coordinator in Ukraine for Doctors Without Borders, OSB, Operational Center in Brussels. He has been in Ukraine since February, arriving initially to help prepare in the event of an escalation of fighting and then coordinating MSF's medical humanitarian response to the war. Between 1993 and 2001, Mr. Stokes worked for MSF in multiple field assignments, including serving as a head of mission in Angola, Indonesia, East Timor, Kosovo, Rwanda, Afghanistan, in Russia, Chechnya during the First Chechen War. Between 2001 and 2007, he was the director of operation for MSF OSB. From 2007 until 2008, he was MSF's International General Secretary, and from 2008 to 2018, he served as the General Director of MSF OSB. When not on field assignment, he presently works for MSF as a senior analyst covering a range of contexts, including Afghanistan, Yemen, and the Gaza Strip, in addition to cross-cutting files. Today, Christopher Stokes is in our studio. Hello, it's nice to have you here with us.
Yeah, hello.
Please tell us a bit about yourself. How did you end up in Doctors Without Borders and MSF head of programs? What does it mean? What exactly you do there?
So actually, I'm the responsible for coordinating MSF's work here in Ukraine. So it involves negotiating with the authorities, designing the projects, the medical projects, meeting the heads of the hospitals and the Ministry of Health here in Kiev, and trying to determine what is the best way that Doctors Without Borders can operate in Ukraine and help civilians and generally the population who are suffering from this conflict.
Right. Well, that's a noble mission as it is. Ukrainian disaster medicine. Does it exist in Ukraine after all? And in case the answer is yes, on scale, say from 1 to 10, how would you rate the quality of its work?
Ukrainian health responders have learned a lot. Since 2014 now, they've got a lot of training and they've had a lot of experience, unfortunately, in dealing with conflict. So the response is really very good. I don't know if I can rate from 1 to 10, but I would say it's very good and very strong.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, that's enough. That's enough. Do you have family, Mr. Stokes?
Yeah, I have a daughter, yeah.
I have a daughter. All right, so the war and sexual violence always walks hand in hand. Have you ever encountered any cases of sexual violence in your medical practice here in Ukraine, on the territory of Ukraine?
So it's true that there is clearly, we've been working in Kherson and Izium in recaptured areas in Donetsk, and clearly we hear the stories that people tell us, but there's still a lot of stigma attached. So people are very hesitant, and it's difficult to get in touch with people directly who will come to see our services. So we haven't had we haven't had cases directly ourselves, but certainly in many of our interactions with people in our clinics, they've told us that they've heard of other people in the village who've been subjected to these issues, but we can't prove it one way or another. We do deal with people who suffered from violence, including people who've been detained. And we're working in a survivors of torture project north of Kiev, where we're dealing with people who did suffer a high level of violence when they were detained. Yeah.
The reason I asked the previous question was that the victims and the survivors prefer, the survivors of sexual violence prefer to keep silent about what happened, because our society is falsely and conditionally, hypocritically, that decency, that shouldn't be there, really, if you ask me. That does not allow victims to tell about what happened. So it's a bit more like our fault, societal fault, and it happened freely, so they can talk about the abuses found and punished. They don't want to talk about it. Do you agree with this?
I think like in most societies where sexual violence takes place, and if it's by one of the parties of the conflict, there is a high level of stigma attached to it. Yeah. People, understandably, are very shy to come forward. They're very worried. Will their information be treated confidentially? Will they be treated in a humane and respectful way? So I think that's a problem that exists in Ukraine as well as it exists in many societies. So it's up to us and other organizations to try and organize our services in a way that makes people comfortable to come forward and tell their story and also seek medical help.
Well, that's a full answer. Christopher Stokes, a doctor, and Christopher Stokes, a human being observing the disasters of this war. Are these two different personalities? How do they differ, if they do?
First, I have to say that I'm not a doctor myself, but I'm the manager of many doctors who work with Doctors Without Borders. We've got a big team in the country, a lot of internationals, a lot of Ukrainian staff, and the job is a 100% commitment. So the person who's working with MSF, with Doctors Without Borders on a day-to-day basis, is the same person in their private life, basically, with all their strengths and weaknesses. It's a very complete job. It's not a job that you stop at 5 o'clock at night. Like a lot of people in Ukraine, we're living the rhythm of this war. So we wake up thinking about the war. We continue working during the day, and it's constantly present in our thoughts. And the same thing at night when we go to sleep, and in the evening when we have dinner, we're talking about what's happening in the country and the situation in the country more generally. So like all the Ukrainians, when you start living here, you can become a bit obsessed with the war and following all the details and the humanitarian impacts. Right. Yeah.
So that's a lot of pressure. Do you have any hobby to escape? Well, anything that helps you to escape?
Actually, one of the hobbies, and it's what is looking at Twitter and following the news. So late at night and following the news and the developments in the country to try and better adapt what we're trying to do. So it's quite hard to escape. This is a war that
yes, indeed.
Has got a lot of media coverage and a lot of Twitter coverage. So there's so much information out there. It's hard to disconnect.
Okay, well then, what was the most shocking thing the team encountered when you entered the territories that were returned under the control of Ukraine, occupied territories?
What we saw, and it's the reason why we published this small report last week, basically consistently we saw a huge level of destruction of healthcare services, healthcare centers, hospitals, clinics across Kherson Oblast, Donetsk Oblast, also parts of Kharkiv Oblast. And that was the most shocking thing, the level of destruction, basically. And in some places, both the medical structure, but also generally the villages and towns have been destroyed. So we've even had to deploy container hospitals or small container clinics because there's not a single building with that's intact or that the roof hasn't been destroyed.
Did the MSF team witness any attacks on Ukrainian hospitals directly? Have you seen that?
Actually, yes, we did on a couple of occasions at least, in Mykolaiv and in Apostolove, which is south of Kryvyi. We did have rocket attacks that were in the hospital in Mykolaiv when we were there, and in Apostolove, it was a hospital where we were regularly working, and and munitions were used. It appears by Russian forces who were firing into these two areas. And so, yes, we were direct witnesses of attacks on medical infrastructure.
Yeah, you must have a hell of a hobby to escape from that, really. Do you have any information regarding access to medical infrastructure in the occupied territories?
So actually, it's become harder and harder to send medical supplies across the front line. So MSF was doing this. It was a little bit easier last year. So I've been here for over a year. It was a little bit easier in the spring and the summer of last year, but the front line has become increasingly hermetic or closed. So we do have phone calls from time to time with health professionals on the other side of the front line in Russian-controlled areas. And they do describe a situation where there's a lack of medicine, a lack of healthcare. So actually, we would like to be able to work on both sides to help Ukrainians in government-controlled areas, but also in opposition in Russian-controlled areas.
Doctors, you have been to many places and seen many wars. How is this war different, if it is?
So it's always difficult to compare wars, and they're all different. They all have specific components. Perhaps one of the most striking aspects of the war in Ukraine, it's not destruction, because destruction you'll see everywhere in all wars in Yemen or Afghanistan, but the scale. So the front line is about 1,000 kilometers long, and across all this front line, you'll see very significant destruction of buildings, hospitals and clinics, as I mentioned before. So it's the scale of the destruction that is quite rare, and that we're seeing here in Ukraine.
Right. The attitude to prisoners of war by Russian occupiers is already a byword. Cruelty, shootings, torture and rapes, you name it. Have you ever thought why Russians hate us so much?
So, yeah, I mean, that's maybe not a question for us. We don't,
I know.
or for me, I'm not from the region. What I would say is that we're not working with prisoners of war. It's not really what MSF does. And indeed, for us to be able to help prisoners of war, we'd have to be able, if we were to want to do that, we'd have to get the authorization to work on both sides and to be able to visit prisons, which obviously we haven't got. MSF for the moment is trying to gain access to both sides of the conflict, to be able to work in places like Donetsk or Oblast or Lugansk and these places, but we haven't received the authorization yet. So we can't really comment on how people are treated for the moment in these prisons, unfortunately.
Well, maybe when you have the authorization, we can talk again, and then we can just tell us about what is going on there. Have you made recently some friends here on the Ukrainian side already?
Actually, a lot of our Ukrainian colleagues, a lot of the work we're doing is done with a mixture of international teams and Ukrainian teams. And I would argue the Ukrainian colleagues are doing the big part of the work. We have over 500 Ukrainian staff. And I don't know if I would we would consider all of them to be friends, because I don't know all 500 that well, but I really admire the courage and the determination, the energy of our colleagues here in Ukraine. They're very brave. They're willing to work in quite dangerous areas, as are the international staff. And actually, one of the problems we have in Ukraine is asking our staff to take holidays, because they're very determined to work as hard as they can. So, yeah, very brave, very determined, and people who I think deserve a lot of admiration, actually.
Would you allow some sort of a personal question?
Yeah, go ahead.
What is your dream? Do you have a dream?
But for example, I was at the railway station yesterday, and we have this MSF medical train, and we've done 100 trips in this train, evacuating 3,000 patients. And I said yesterday that one of perhaps a dream would be that the train would no longer be a medical train evacuating wounded, but would be able to, that there would be peace and the train would be able to move civilians as it did before, and ordinary Ukrainians, and perhaps be part of a museum on the war afterwards. So
Beautiful dream.
yeah, if I had one wish, it was this war to end as quickly as possible, like all wars, by the way.
Well, we share that. Makes it two of us. The whole country wants this, but we want victory, not just the stop of the war. Well, thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you very much, Mr. Stokes, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank
you for having us.
Thank you. Goodbye. See you soon. That's all for today and this week, folks. It was Henrique on UATV channel, doing my best in breaking hard things into easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Please stay safe and tuned for more. See you soon.